Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome again to AuthorStory. I'm Alexander Lim, your host. And this week we have a somewhat lyrical show in store. And for those of you who are into modern day music, possibly dance as well, you might be able to pick up a thing or two here. For this episode, I'm interviewing Dr. Raphael Travis Jr., author of the book The Healing Power of Hip Hop. And for those of you following along, please feel free to go over now to the Amazon link below the video to check out and or get a copy of The Healing Power of Hip Hop. So Dr. Travis, welcome to AuthorStory. It's great to have you as our guest.
Good morning, Alex. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, cool. You're welcome. You're welcome. So Dr. Travis, please introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about your story. Like, what's your background and the degree that you hold?
Sure. So right now I'm an associate professor at Texas State University in the School of Social Work.
Okay.
And Texas State's in San Marcos, about a half an hour south of Austin, Texas. And I've been there for coming up on about 9 years. And I am a licensed clinical social worker. And my doctoral degree is in public health, which I received from UCLA. And really excited to talk a little bit about this book. This book is it's called The Healing Power of Hip Hop, and it really brings together really all without dating myself too much, all 42 years of my life.
All right, okay.
Both personally and professionally, and it connects my interest in learning about positive youth development, or the things that we want to see in young people, and all the different strategies that we use to promote positive health and well-being, with music being one of them.
Please.
I was just going to say my background. I grew up in Roslyn, New York, Long Island, for those that are not familiar with the landscape of New York, about a half an hour outside of New York City. And I've been on all different coasts. I've been on the DC area, the West Coast, Los Angeles, and now I'm here in Texas.
Cool. All right. All right. So, Dr. Travis, what is this book all about?
Yeah, so, I wrote this with two audiences in mind. So the first audience is, the quote unquote hip hop head, and that's the person that's been totally immersed in the culture, really understands the nuances of the culture, and uses it both personally and professionally.
Right.
The second audience that I wrote it for is the person that that looks at the title and is like, The Healing Power of Hip Hop. How in the world could you possibly connect healing and hip hop together? The people that their biggest association with the culture may be only what they hear on the radio, or maybe blasting out of somebody's car as it sits at the light, or drives past, and but people that really don't have much of a grasp at all. So those are the two audiences that I wrote the book for, and really there are three main goals with both of those audiences. And the first is to understand how hip hop changes life, and that it's really a fuel for life, or a renewing natural resources that people use both for self-improvement and community improvement. And the second thing is really to introduce people to a new generation of leaders, and I call them cultural ambassadors, but people that they understand how hip hop is, because they've lived it, right? They understand how it's helped them personally. They're using it professionally, whether they're teachers or counselors or after school program workers, and show them the research. They understand the research that's out there. We've moved beyond the point where it's just kind of anecdotal information, where this might be interesting to use in the classroom or use in therapy. We moved to a place where research shows there's some real powerful ways that people interact with music in their life.
Right.
And then the third thing I wanted to do is really just celebrate the richness of the culture, and and help people be comfortable with the idea that we can invest in hip hop as a culture and leverage, the most empowering aspects of it, to help young people, well, really help everybody. I kind of focus on young people, but it's really to help everybody learn and grow from the best aspects of hip hop.
Okay, all right, cool. So, how did you get involved with hip hop? I mean, I get it that you grew up in New York, and how involved were you in it when you were like growing up?
Yeah, so I mean, it's always been a part of my environment. Early in the earlier days, there's kind of this label of hip hop now, but when I was growing up, it was just part of life. It
Okay,
was just when b-boying and b-girling was out, or what people know as breakdancing, it was just, okay, here's some new dancing that
okay,
people are doing. How can I learn this and
right,
learn that? When it comes to graffiti, and I was always too scared to actually use spray paint and write on a wall, but I
okay,
loved the visual aesthetics of graffiti, and so I always wanted to learn how to draw this, and it's always write my name and letters, and adding designs and
right.
features to it, and I just loved the aesthetic of graffiti, and so
Mm,
that was just part of what I practiced doing. And music is music.
yep, true.
For us, it was a new kind. It was more of like, it was less about the label, but it was like, what's this new type of music that I'm really attracted to and I love, and I want to hear more of it.
All right.
And so at the time, particularly the musical element, it was an underground thing.
Uh-huh.
The regular radio stations wouldn't play it.
Uh-huh.
Um, they thought it was, this noise and, kid stuff. And so the only way that we could really listen to it, there were some college stations that had it.
Right.
And, like WBAU was one of the local college stations. And, it came on at a certain time and you had to record it,
Right.
and listen to it later. And so finally it made its way to certain radio stations, but still it wouldn't be on all the time. There would be
Right. Right.
certain mix shows that came on at a certain time. You had to know when those were and record them. And, so from the musical side, again, before it had this umbrella concept, it was just something exciting, new, different, I could connect to, I could relate to the
Right. Right.
words. So that was it. It was just part and parcel with me growing up, and then over
Mm,
time it kind of mushroomed into what we know of it today.
mm. Okay. Cool. Got that. So, what inspired you actually to write the book? I mean, particularly with hip hop as its subject matter.
Yeah. So as a researcher, well, we wear many hats, but
Right.
uh, as a researcher, my main area of work was around this concept of positive youth development. And in a nutshell, it's saying, instead of us spending so much time, trying to develop programs around preventing these bad stuff these bad things that we want to prevent from happening in young people's lives, let's think about the things we want to see,
Mm,
right? And the things we want to invest in, and let's understand what that is, and how to go about promoting that. So, instead of the reason that's important is a subtle difference. Many people may say, well, it's kind of the same thing, but the reason that is important is because what you measure is different, right?
mm.
So success from preventing things is, less violence, less
Right.
substance use,
Right.
less, early pregnancy, right?
Right.
The,
Right.
the measurement from a positive side is, how much confidence, what skills do you have,
Right.
right?
Right.
Uh, what is your sense of belonging in these spaces?
Mm,
So from a measurement standpoint, really interested in thinking about, what are these things we want to see, and then how do we make that happen? Whether it's
mm.
through sports or basket weaving or music or, these different things. And so that was the main focus for me. But at the time, a lot of people were taking a look at music and, what are the effects of different types of music. And
Right.
what I found is that the discussion tended to fall in two categories. The first category, which is where the research started, is basically the assumption that there are these potential negative effects of interacting with hip hop. And really at the time, like rock and hip hop were kind of together, lumped together.
Right.
There were these concerns about, certain type of rock music and certain type of hip hop. So that was one camp. Like, what are the negative effects of listening, watching, engaging in hip hop music? The other side was, the positive side, which is, what are the good things that come from engaging with hip hop around identity and and things like that. But rarely was there a discussion of both at the same time.
Okay.
Is it possible that interacting with really any type of entertainment, but here the conversations on hip hop, because I was so connected to the culture.
Right.
And my question was like, well, how can it be helpful and harmful? I'm interested in individuals talking about both for them. So when you think about your engagement of hip hop in your life personally, not just a general opinion about the world, but you personally, how is it helpful and how is it harmful? And what I also wanted to do was come at it from a more quantitative approach and really kind of measuring certain things, whereas a lot of the early work was qualitative, or it was interviews and discussions and kind of talking about it from that angle. And the reason that I felt that it was important was unfortunately, again, kind of going back to people that may not be as familiar with the culture.
Right.
If everything is only in narrative form, it doesn't really get the same attention. It doesn't get the same sort of empirical respect, And so I wanted to bring some statistics to the table, bring some, real quantitative, strong measurement of these ideas to capture the two sides of the story within the same individual. So those were my two main things that brought me to it, because I know, again, going back to my work in youth development in general, I know that hip hop has some really empowering benefits that do promote positive development, and I wanted to basically get some evidence that could help people get that, but also pay attention to the risky stuff as well, and I felt that that's important, from a public health standpoint. There's some very significant and real concerns about exposure to risky attitudes and behaviors, and these places where that is promoted, and so I wanted to be sure to give proper service to both sides of the story within the same argument,
Okay.
So that's what brought me to the table with that.
All right, cool. Got that. Very interesting. Very interesting. So we've been talking about hip hop as in terms, effects in the book and all that stuff, but for the benefit of I guess a lot of us aren't really immersed in the culture itself. What is hip hop? I know it's a cultural phenomenon. Like, what are its underlying themes? What are its values? What is hip hop really?
It's an important question, because there are different elements that I think are significant and worth pointing out. At its most basic, the umbrella concept of hip hop, most give credit to African Bambaataa for giving the overall culture this umbrella term, within which several different elements kind of coalesce. And we have the dance element, and that's b-boying and b-girling is the sort of core cultural name given to it. As it made its way to the mainstream, it came under the name breakdancing, and that's what most people associate with it. And there's, it's kind of morphed into, nowadays some people talk about hip hop dance and street dance, but the origins were around b-boys and b-girls, and the scaffolded dancing that came came out of that is one element of the culture. Another element is graffiti, and nowadays it's kind of made its way into kind of mural arts
Right.
and various ways that people present art visually and publicly. But at the core of the culture is graffiti, and
Right.
another element is emceeing, and that's the rapping, that's the verbal and lyrical component of the culture,
Right.
and that is often in conjunction with DJing,
Right.
and that's even changed. Nowadays it's kind of DJing and production,
Right.
but at its core, it was the unique style of DJing. It's not like DJing was new, of course. As long as records have been out, there have been DJs, but there are several unique aspects of DJing that came uniquely from the culture, and probably the most significant one, not necessarily significant, but the thing that really captured people's attention and set it apart from different types of DJing before was the idea of extending the break. And basically that's, when the most exciting part of a song came, a little breakdown in the beat that really got people excited and dancing. What Kool Herc and some of his contemporaries of the time did was extend that. And the way they did it was they took 2 records. And so they would move from that break on one record, and they would start it again on the second record. So it was a seamless continuation of that really, really exciting part of the song. And then when that was done, it would go back to the other. And basically what that did was that created a new musical experience, which was particularly exciting for the dancers, the party goers, because, they literally changed music, right? They took this song that everybody already liked, and they created something by extending the most exciting part of the song.
Right.
And there are lots of things that came along with that, with scratching and basically using the turntable as an instrument, as opposed to something that you just simply put a record on and move away from, right? You participated with the turntable and engaged the music and created anew. And that, that led to, a huge part of what hip hop is, and that is taking something and innovating upon, what material you're presented with. So those are the 4 pieces. Then there's a fifth element of the culture that doesn't get talked about quite as much, but really underscores a lot of, these ideas about how hip hop can be healing. And that 5th element is knowledge of self. And basically that's the continual self-reflection. That's the continual kind of look inward and, exploring a sense of self kind of within the environment that you're within. And so, those are kind of the anchors of the culture. And there are a lot of things that go along with that. But, kind of the core values really come down to the idea of improvement, both self-improvement and community improvement. I mentioned Afrika Bambaataa earlier, and and one of the things that I think is most significant about him, and even just the idea of naming hip hop as a culture, when it's these kind of loose-fitting elements that were going on at the same time, but it was the deliberate idea of saying, hey, let's all of you that that love graffiti, that love b-boying, that love DJing, that love MCing, let's come together in the spirit of doing something different, in the spirit of saying, we're not going to be out there fighting. People that may have been kind of enemies out there on the street, we're going to come together in the idea of peace, in the idea of unity, and the idea of doing something different, right? Because it involves choice, right? It involves deliberately saying, hey, let's choose a different path, something that's going to help me as an individual, but something ultimately that's going to help us move in a different direction.
Right.
We can still be, proud of who we are. We can still try to be the best. We can still try to, continually excel at whatever craft, we have and be number one. But at the same time, the larger spirit of this is, is about us overall doing better.
Right.
At a time when there are a lot of kind of social pressures um, that made things difficult for people at the time. But I think that underlying value of self and community improvement is a core part of the culture, and that's where you get into the issue with risk, right? That's
Right.
where you
Right.
get into the issue of you know how do I move ahead and get better in life? There's lots of different ways people can choose that, and some are higher risk and some are lower risk, but the same desire is there, right,
Right.
for improvement.
Okay, I got that. Well, that puts it in an interesting light because the next thing I wanted to ask was, I mean, hip hop, it's got a bit of a negative connotation. It's got critics, sectors in society
Yeah.
say that this hip hop is negative, bad, that sort of thing. What is it about hip hop that makes people not see it in a positive light, in positive terms for a lot of these guys?
Yeah, well, I think, one of the with anything in life, there's a famous saying, where you decide to start the story uh, influences significantly how it's received, right?
Mm,
And so, for many people, they start the story of hip hop of what they hear on the radio,
right,
and so that presents a very limited idea of what the culture is all about.
right,
One of the
right,
common examples I give is, many people are signed up for Netflix, right? So
right.
what if, you hear all these great things about Netflix, and then when you sign up for Netflix, they say, you can have it, but you can only search for films in the action adventure category,
Mm,
right? And so, you go your whole time only searching for movies in there, you get a very different representation of what Netflix is all about.
mm,
And so I think a lot of people are divorced from the overall culture and limited to what they hear in the mainstream.
right.
And what we know about the mainstream is that the mainstream or what I mean is what's presented in the mainstream media entertainment outlets of what falls under the category of hip hop is very, very narrow.
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with changes in the entertainment industry. Right now, there are only really three main, what used to be called record labels, but now
Mm,
they're entertainment,
mm,
conglomerates. And so if you're trying to have your music get out there through mainstream channels, then you're going to have to go along with whatever the culture is within those mainstream.
right.
When hip hop first started, like I mentioned earlier, it was an underground phenomenon,
Right.
right? So, but once uh, people recognized that there was money that could be made and that it could be made into a product to sell as opposed to simply an art to interact with,
Right.
things changed dramatically.
Mm,
Before it was really on the radar, you had such a wide range of hip hop on mainstream outlets, right? Because it all fell under the banner. But once things, people uh, uh, began to sell it as an entertainment product, that's when you started to see differences.
mm,
And again, kind of going back to our earlier discussion about research, it's, we've been able to actually, look at this systematically. What has been the change in content in mainstream songs? And there has been a change over time. We
mm,
have seen an increase in, uh, the glorification of substances, right?
right.
We have
Right.
seen an increase in violence. These are all empirical things now. It's not just kind of anecdotal. And, and the way to, the one way to think about it, it's not that within hip hop content has changed. In fact, there's much more empowering and kind of health affirming hip hop music out there than there ever was in the past. It's just where you can access it is
Mm,
different, right? Because
mm,
technology has allowed, people to self-produce, promote through social media. So there's no lack of empowering or helpful content in hip hop. Is significantly more. It's not even close. It dwarfs whatever has been out at what people like to say is the golden age of hip hop. Right? There's just volumes more. But when you look at the mainstream outlets of where it's distributed, the things that you'll see, on the charts and all that kind of thing, is very different. In any radio outlet, you have much more high risk messages, and there's no limits, there's no parameters set. And so, for those that critique it, I 100% understand, and that's part of when I was talking earlier about telling both sides of the story.
Right.
I think it's critically important because we have to be concerned about the violence. We have to be concerned about the misogyny. We have to be concerned about the glorification of substances because they have real world consequences.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But related to that, the saying, you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Right.
At times, those particular types of content can be a great doorway to having some real world discussions at the same time, right? We're going to have young people that are going to be in situations where these types of attitudes or behaviors are glorified. And so, what does a young person do when put in a setting where they have to make these split-second decisions, right? What are their attitudes about these issues? A lot of times, violent, discussions about violence and narratives about violence in hip hop are reflective of, the immediate social environment that some of our young people are in, and we have to be able to talk about these things as well, So it's a lot of interesting things, but we can't be afraid of it, I think, is the issue, and we can't dismiss it as not worthy of interrogation and not worth of exploring.
True. Okay. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, there has to be a conversation is only as good as the clarity that's given.
Yeah.
All right. So with regards to hip hop, I mean, what is it about? Let's go to the the more positive side, the more positive aspect, the one that doesn't get out in the mainstream or entertainment, as you mentioned. What ways can hip hop contribute to, like, as your book said, to health and to learning? What ways can it contribute positively to society and to communities?
Yeah. So in looking closely at content, what we found is that there are really 5 narratives that are consistently the way that music is presented, and the 5 narratives all correspond to that idea of self and community improvement that we were talking about earlier, and they're really just different ways of stating people's journey towards better in their life. The first is around esteem and essentially trying to feel better. What are the ways that people are trying to kind of negotiate their place in life and feel better? Some is simply about joy and having fun and having a good time. But sometimes it is about power and influence and, affirming oneself through positioning and status and things like that.
Right.
The second area is around the concept of resilience, and basically that's doing better. There are a lot of adversities that people go through, a lot of challenges and obstacles that people face in life, and so many of the narratives in hip hop are about overcoming those adversities and coping and making it through these challenges, and so understanding that it's kind of a universal thing, right? We all go through challenges, and it's a good feeling to think about how we can do better, in our particular situation.
Right.
So so aside from feeling better and doing better, there's also narratives about being better as a person, right? Those growth narratives about turning over a new leaf, or kind of charting off a new, more positive path.
Right.
Thinking about what does it take to be the best version of myself, and a lot of times along with that you have these narratives of people kind of talking about, kind of taking on a mentorship or role model position, where they're kind of giving these words of advice to the younger generation, these kind of lessons about how to do things differently. But those are all growth narratives. Those are about being better as a person.
Right.
And those three areas, fall under that self-improvement categories, and that's kind of the individual side of empowerment.
Right.
And then we also have the community side. So we
Right.
talked about community improvement and community empowerment. And the two areas there are about a better sense of belonging, right? That sense of community that people have. And that falls across the spectrum. That could be in the family, that could be in the workplace, that could be in school, that could be kind of in the geographic community. There's a million songs that you'll hear that are, shouting out a city or,
Right.
or a
Right.
state or a town or a neighborhood, right? Those are belonging narratives, right? So,
Right.
I'm proud to be a part of this community. Could be around race or ethnicity. And then the second and fifth category is around change or better conditions for the communities we value. And so, from the earliest songs, that people might remember, songs like Fight the Power and things like that, those are those change narratives. It doesn't have to be around race or ethnicity, but it's about, hey, the conditions for this given set of situation is not right, and I'm speaking about it from the perspective that we need to do things differently here, right?
Right.
And so those five narratives really bring together, these ideas of improvement, whether it's more focused on the individual level or it's more at the community level, and that's the starting point for using hip hop to learn and grow. Like for example, there's a Twitter chat that I participate on Tuesday evenings. It's called hashtag Hip Hop Ed, and they concentrate a little bit more on the learning side, on the educational side. But the question of last night was, how can we better connect young people to Black History Month, and some of the historical aspects of Black culture that Black History Month tries to, put on people's radar in a more significant and sustained way. But basically, the underlying question is, how can we use some of the existing music to point people in directions that they can better learn about, certain things.
Right.
But you can do that for any part of education, right?
Right.
Any educational subject. There are songs that help you unpack, what's going on, and so there are, one of the most prominent educational initiatives. One little asterisk related to that. So there's two ways you can think about hip hop and education. So one is the way that's probably been dominant for most of the time, and it's creating a rhyme to help people memorize something, right? That's kind of the most common way people think of it. But kind of the newer generation of thinking about hip hop as a tool within education is both, what are some of the aspects of how we do things in hip hop that can be used as a teaching tool? And then the other is, how can we be more deliberate and expansive about helping people learn about the world through hip hop? And those are the two strategies that that most people focus on now. And so one of the more prominent initiatives is done by Dr. Chris Emden. He's out of Columbia, and he focuses a lot on hip hop as a pathway to understanding science and science concepts. And you take something as simple as thinking about DJing and beat production.
Right,
Those
right,
are extraordinarily math and technology heavy equipment and concepts that people have to do in order to be skilled at that. And so simply the idea of unpacking that allows you to think about science in a different kind of way. And that's less about the content of a given song, but it's about this aspect of the culture as a pathway to understanding. But at
right,
the same time, there are lots of songs that have lots of science concepts, and you help you think about science in a different way
right.
when you explore it a little bit.
Mm.
Um, so there's so many ways, and I think we're just scratching the surface. And
Okay, okay.
it's a big part of what the book is about, to help
Right.
people think a little differently and get creative.
Cool. Okay, cool. So, Dr. Travis, in the last few minutes of this interview, let me pose a question to you. If you met up with someone who had absolutely no idea what hip hop is, and you had only time to tell him one thing about hip hop, the most important thing about hip hop, what is it that you would tell that person?
I would say that to understand that hip hop is a fuel for life. It's a renewable, like a natural resource. There's no end to it, and it's a constant source of learning and growth. And it's a way that speaks both to the individual to help them be at their best, and a way that speaks to that individual's place within society to
Hmm.
help society be a better place.
All right, cool. Well, that's definitely an interesting insight right there. So thanks so much for that. So,
Yeah.
in closing, the book is The Healing Power of Hip Hop. The authors are guest, Dr. Raphael Travis, and you can find this book on Amazon. So, Dr. Travis, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being an author story. It's a revelation, and I'm sure our listeners now have a better understanding of hip hop and what it can do.
Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate your time and this venue and the invitation to be on your show.
Cool. And if you'd like to follow our author interviews on YouTube, just click subscribe. And if you'd like, you can buy the book right now. Just go to the link in the video description. And yes, it is that easy. So bye for now, everyone. I'll be back on Author Story with another inspiring author.